The war was over, but Germany wasn't at peace. The air still smelled of burnt wood, diesel, and fear. Whole cities lay in ruins, and the faces of those who survived looked older than their years. The Allies had won, but victory felt hollow when surrounded by the rubble of what used to be homes, schools, and lives. In a small village outside Frankfurt, Anna Muller, 24, stood in a line for food rations, her dress patched in 3 places. Her husband had died on the Eastern Front. She had no children, no parents left. Like many German women, she survived by trading what little she had for bread or cigarettes. The war had stripped her not only of comfort, but of dignity. That same week, American troops rolled into her town, men in olive green uniforms, laughing, smoking, handing out candy to German children. To the locals, they were both saviors and occupiers. Rumors spread fast. The Americans were kind, but sometimes cruel. Some soldiers gave chocolate. Others took whatever they wanted. Anna kept her distance. Never trust a victor, her neighbor used to say. But hunger and hopelessness have a way of softening suspicion. One evening, while she was scavenging for coal near the old rail yard, she met Corporal James Parker, a mechanic from Ohio. He was fixing a truck that had broken down near the bridge. His German was terrible, her English non-existent, but when he saw her struggling to carry a bucket of coal, he offered help. She froze, unsure whether it was pity or mockery. Yet his face carried no malice, just exhaustion. "Here," he said, gesturing, and lifted the bucket himself. That was the first time she'd seen an American up close without a weapon raised. In the following weeks, their paths crossed again, once at the ration station, then at the well. Parker would smile, wave, sometimes offer a piece of gum or a can of soup. Anna refused at first. Pride was all she had left. But one cold morning, when her fingers went numb and her stomach was empty, she accepted. He never asked for anything in return. Their quiet exchanges drew attention. Other women whispered, some jealous, others fearful. "Don't forget what they did to our men," one said. But Anna had seen too much death to keep hating. The Americans weren't angels, but Parker, he seemed different. One day, an officer warned his men, no fraternization. Command doesn't want you getting friendly with the locals. But such orders were like trying to stop spring from coming. After years of blood and silence, humans craved warmth, even from the so-called enemy. A few weeks later, Anna's home was destroyed by a fire caused by an overturned stove. With nowhere to go, she sat in the ruins, crying quietly. Parker found her there, covered in ash. Without hesitation, he brought her to the camp kitchen, let her wash, and gave her a clean blanket. Other soldiers frowned. A German woman among them was bad optics, but he didn't care. That night, as the snow began to fall, Anna looked around the camp where American soldiers joked, sang, and played harmonica by the fire. They were boys, not monsters. Some barely 20. She thought of her own brother, who'd died in uniform, and realized war had made victims of both sides. When Parker offered her a cup of hot coffee, she took it, her hands trembling. "Danke," she whispered. He didn't understand the word, but smiled anyway. In that moment, the first invisible bridge between conqueror and conquered was built, not with politics, but with shared humanity. By the winter's end, Anna began helping in the camp kitchen as a cleaner. The Americans paid her in food and soap, luxuries in ruined Germany. She worked quietly, efficiently, always under the wary eyes of other soldiers. Yet Parker's kindness never changed. Sometimes he'd tell her stories in slow English, about his hometown in Ohio, about his mother's apple pie, about baseball games he missed. She didn't understand every word, but she liked the sound of his voice. It was gentle, like a lullaby in a world that had forgotten tenderness. At night, alone in the barracks corner, Anna wondered what kind of man he was, this enemy who treated her with more decency than many of her own people had during the war. When spring came, she smiled for the first time in years. It was faint, uncertain, but real. And as Parker prepared to move out with his unit, he left her a small note written in shaky German. "You are strong. Don't lose hope. James." Anna read it over and over, memorizing every letter. The war had taken everything from her, but somehow, in the ruins, it had also given her something new. The first hint that not all enemies stayed enemies forever. By the spring of 1946, Germany was no longer a battlefield. It was a wounded patient. Cities were half rebuilt, black markets thrived, and everyone learned to survive on cigarettes, canned food, and silence. The Allied occupation had divided the country, and the American zone in Frankfurt became a strange mix of uniforms, ration cards, and fragile peace. Anna Muller had changed, too. The once starving widow now worked as a translator and helper for the U.S. Army Kitchen Unit, thanks to the few English words she'd learned from Corporal James Parker. Every morning she walked past checkpoints where German civilians still lowered their heads before the Allied guards. She had grown used to the sound of English, loud, confident, foreign. James had been promoted to sergeant, though he often said it meant little. Paper and rank don't mean much when all you want is to go home, he'd tell her, laughing softly. But home wasn't calling him as loudly as before. Something, or rather someone, had tied him to the gray streets of Frankfurt. They met often now, sometimes over coffee in the canteen, other times while distributing supplies to the locals. Their friendship had become the worst-kept secret in the unit. A German woman and an American soldier sharing smiles and quiet moments. It was enough to start rumors that could end careers. In early summer, an American captain confronted James. "Sergeant Parker, you've been seen spending time with that German girl. You know the rules." James didn't deny it. "She's not the enemy anymore, sir. The war's over." The captain's face hardened. "The papers say the war's over, but hearts don't heal that fast. Keep your distance. Fraternization laws are still in effect." James nodded, but disobeyed quietly. He'd seen too much death to believe in such rules. That evening, when he found Anna by the river washing clothes, she noticed the tension in his eyes. "They said something?" she asked carefully, her German accent heavy but clear. He hesitated. "They think we shouldn't talk." Anna smiled sadly. "They always think that." She'd lost friends because of this. Women accused of being a Millie Ebchen, American lovers, often beaten or humiliated in the streets. Some had their heads shaved as punishment for falling in love with the occupiers. For many Germans, the Americans were not heroes but reminders of defeat. Still, when James held out his hand that evening, she took it. "Let them think what they want," she whispered. "We both survived. Isn't that enough?" Their relationship deepened quietly. Letters were exchanged in secret, hidden in ration boxes and coat pockets. They spoke of small things, the weather, music, the future. James taught her English words. She taught him German songs. But the world outside wasn't kind. The more they cared for each other, the more dangerous it became. One autumn night in 1946, a drunk American private made a cruel joke about German girls and their hunger for chocolate. James punched him so hard, he broke his nose. For that, he was nearly court-martialed. Only his spotless record saved him. But word spread, and Anna was banned from the camp. Weeks passed before they met again. She now worked in a Red Cross supply post, handing out aid to displaced families. Her once bright spirit seemed dimmed. When James found her there, he stood silently for a long time before she finally turned and looked at him. "I thought they sent you home," she said. He shook his head. "Not yet. I don't want to go not without you." Her eyes widened, half fear, half disbelief. "James, you can't mean that. You're an American. I'm a German. They'll never allow it." But he did mean it. That winter, James applied for permission to marry under the U.S. Army War Brides Act, a new policy passed in late 1945 allowing soldiers to bring foreign wives to America. It was meant for British and French women, not Germans. Many officers laughed at his request. "A Kraut bride," one sneered. "You'll never get approval." Still, he persisted. He filled out the forms, found a sympathetic chaplain, and even managed to contact Anna's surviving relatives for consent. For weeks, bureaucratic silence hung over them like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, life in Germany worsened. Food shortages hit again in 1947. Coal was rationed. People traded watches and family heirlooms for bread. Anna's small room was freezing at night, and sometimes she fell asleep dreaming of Ohio, a place she'd never seen, yet one that had come alive in James's stories. Green fields, Sunday church bells, a wooden porch where life felt safe. When the approval letter finally arrived, she didn't believe it at first. It was stamped and signed official. She could marry an American soldier, the first of its kind in their region. They married quietly in a church that had lost its steeple to bombs, with a few soldiers and local women as witnesses. Anna wore a plain dress sewn from a parachute, white, soft, and symbolic. James wore his uniform, freshly pressed. There were no flowers, no music, just the echo of vows spoken between two people who had once been enemies. After the ceremony, the priest, an old man who had seen too many funerals, said softly, "If this world has hope left, it begins here." Outside, the rain fell steadily. James placed his army jacket over her shoulders, and they walked hand in hand through the ruins. People stared, some in shock, some in silent hatred, but neither of them cared. That night, as they shared a small piece of bread and laughed at their broken mix of German and English, Anna realized something profound. The Americans hadn't tortured them. They'd changed them. And in the ashes of war, something impossible had bloomed. Love between conqueror and conquered, born not of desire, but of the desperate human need to feel whole again. The Atlantic crossing took 12 days. The sea was rough, the cabin small, and the air inside the ship smelled of diesel and hope. Dozens of women like Anna Parker, née Muller, stood on deck, staring toward the west, clutching the only possessions they had, small suitcases, marriage papers, and photographs of the American soldiers who had promised them a new life. They were called German war brides. Some Americans viewed them with curiosity, others with suspicion. Newspapers wrote cautious headlines. U.S. soldiers bringing German wives home. Can they adjust? For Anna, every wave felt like a question. She was leaving behind a ruined homeland and walking into the unknown. James held her hand tightly as the Statue of Liberty came into view. "Oh," he whispered. But to her, the word felt fragile, like glass that could break at any moment. Ohio was colder than she expected. Not the kind of cold that came from snow, but the kind that came from distance, from people's eyes. The Parkers lived in a small town outside Cleveland, a place of red barns, white fences, and quiet gossip. James's mother, Margaret Parker, met them at the station wearing a gray coat and polite smile. She hugged her son, then turned to Anna with hesitation. "So, you're the young lady from Germany," she said, her tone careful. Anna smiled nervously. Yes, ma'am. I am." The house was warm, filled with smells of cinnamon and old wood. But under the politeness, she felt something heavy, the weight of judgment. To the neighbors, she was the German woman, the one who'd once been the enemy. Some whispered that she must have been desperate. Others wondered if she'd married James for a ticket out of the ruins. For the first time since the war ended, Anna felt lonely again. The language barrier made everything harder. When she shopped for groceries, people spoke too fast. When she helped in church, women avoided her gaze. Children sometimes pointed and asked, "Is she a Nazi?" James defended her again and again, but the battle this time was different. It wasn't fought with guns, but with silence and stares. Determined to fit in, Anna studied English every night by the kitchen lamp, repeating words until her tongue ached. She learned to cook American meals, though she still missed black bread and cabbage soup. Slowly, Margaret softened. One evening, as they baked together, the older woman said quietly, "I lost a brother in France. I used to hate everything German." Anna hesitated. "I lost everyone," she replied softly. That shared loss was the first crack in the wall between them. By spring of 1949, Anna had found small joys, a vegetable garden, Sunday walks with James, letters from other war brides scattered across the U.S. They wrote to each other about homesickness, about the struggle to be accepted, about the guilt of being the enemy's wife. Many Americans treated them kindly, others never did. Still, Anna never regretted leaving. "At least here," she wrote in one letter, "no one is hungry and the sky feels clean." James, meanwhile, returned to work in a local factory. Life was simple, honest, but not everyone welcomed him either. Some veterans refused to shake his hand. "You brought one of them home?" they'd ask. He'd just shrug. "She's my wife," he'd say. They built their own little world. Two people from opposite sides of the war, learning how to live in peace together. On Sundays, they'd sit on the porch watching cars pass by. Sometimes, old memories would return. The ruins of Frankfurt, the sound of bombers, the hunger. But when she looked at James, she saw something stronger than the past: forgiveness. In late 1949, Anna gave birth to a daughter, Emily Parker, a child born of two nations that once tried to destroy each other. The nurses at the hospital smiled kindly, though one of them whispered, half German, "Huh?" Anna heard it, but didn't react. She simply kissed her baby's forehead and whispered, "You are proof that love survives wars." When she took Emily home, Margaret held the baby gently, tears in her eyes. "She has your eyes," she said to Anna. That was the moment the last bit of resentment melted away. Over the next years, Anna began teaching German to local school children. Parents who once avoided her now sent their kids to her classes. Her accent became softer, her laugh louder. The town that once looked at her as the enemy slowly came to see her as the neighbor. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, Anna found an old envelope in the bottom of a trunk. The note James had given her years ago in Germany. "You are strong. Don't lose hope." She smiled, tears forming. That note had carried her across oceans, through suspicion and loneliness, all the way to this quiet backyard where her daughter played with a wooden toy. War had destroyed nations, but somehow, two broken souls had built a small piece of their own. By the early 1950s, thousands of German women like Anna had married American soldiers and moved across the ocean. Some marriages thrived, others failed. But their stories shared one truth: that love can grow even in the ruins of hatred. Folded hands. Anna never returned to Germany. She once told her daughter, "My home is where I was forgiven." When people asked her how it felt to marry the enemy, she would simply smile and say, "He didn't see an enemy. He saw a human." And that, perhaps, was the quietest victory of all. Not won on battlefields, but in hearts that chose peace